cardio is important.
Strength training is out. Cardio is in.
The main question that we want you to ask is like, when should I be doing this and when should I not be doing that? And then knowing when to toggle between the two. It's pretty crazy to think that. I think the guy named was Kenneth Cooper in the 70s sparked up the whole cardio training thing. Aerobic fitness, heart health, and there's a lot of merit to it. And like everything else, the same thing that happened at CrossFit is the messaging got watered down and changed and bastardized. And now in hindsight, it's probably in the vein of marketing. Someone was trying to sell something like, how do I take this and make it edgy? And then it got edgier and edgier and edgier and edgier. And then it's unrecognizable. And then they're like, well, this is different. And then people are like, oh, that thing sucks. And then strength training. And like, so there's been a pretty drastic evolution. And it seems like about every 10 to 12 years, there's a pretty big shift and a swing inside of the health sector and what fitness consumers are looking for, because, people just are trying to sell some shit at the end of the day. So marketers really drive trends as I'm talking about this out loud. And it's a problem because it should be researchers and scientists.
I was actually listening to a Hormozy podcast this morning. Okay.
Great.
So the interesting thing on there, and the title of the podcast, I'm going to butcher it a smidge, is like, why smart people don't grow big businesses. And the general idea is the smarter you are, the more perfect and better of a plan that you end up building. And you start to understand the like conceptual side of things really, really, really well, but you don't understand the applied side at all because you've never actually done it. Right? It's like, who are you going to hire to go help you sell and exit your business? Somebody who has studied at length exiting and selling businesses but has never done it, or the person that's actually done it this one time?
I mean, I just struggle to think that someone's studied learning how to buy and sell businesses for so long and they've never done it. Like, how long is so long? You do that shit for 10 years and like, come on, man. That's
it just goes to your point though, right? You have these researchers who are really good at understanding the actual things that happen in the body and the concepts, but they've never actually gone to the gym and like done the thing, or they've never obviously done direct response marketing and whatnot. But think about it. I'm sure somewhere, if we go type on Google right now, there's probably somebody that has said cardio causes more heart attacks than not doing cardio, or something like that. Like, cardio kills people is probably a headline out there.
Yeah, it's going to be the episode for this
cardio
podcast.
Kills people, but it's contrarian. It's going to get people to click, which becomes the thing. And
yes,
when we've talked about the marketing stuff before, and this is not a marketing episode by any stretch, but when everybody out there is failing at what they're trying to achieve, a really easy thing to lean into is to identify the thing that they're all doing, in this case, cardio, and basically go and turn around and be like, you're not failing because cardio, you're failing because everything you know about it is wrong. And the reality is you need to be doing this, that, and everything else. And, it's right now, strength training and lifting. And in 10 years, strength training and lifting is bad. Like, it's just what's going to happen. So OTF, when you guys you'll get back to your glory days in 12 more years if you can hang on, and group classes and boutique studios. Like, you'll get there. Just right now is not your time.
It does seem like the ones that exist survive those lulls. I mean, Gold's Gym, they restructured recently, and actually, I haven't seen a Gold's Gym in quite some time, as I say that out loud. I don't know if they survived it.
I have no idea.
24-hour fitness survived.
By me is more like, you either have the high-end box, gyms like your Lifetimes and Equinoxes, I would say, or you have your, in a cheap, very value-driven, Fitness 19s and Planet Fitnesses and those guys. I mean, I go to Fitness 19, but it's also a 4-minute drive from my house. It's super simple and easy. It's a convenience factor over everything else.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's always going to be the main thing, especially as life gets more convenient, like you cram more shit into your life, which somehow makes you busier and more stressed, which makes convenience even more of an important pivotal aspect of considering what your buying behavior is going to be. Is it easy? Can I get it now? Amazon by tomorrow? Like, if I ever get anything on Amazon anymore, if it can't be here the same day, I don't want it. Like, I'm like, where's the next one? It's 11 a.m. I want it by 2 p.m.,
You're
please.
that? Are you really?
Okay, if
I
it
mean,
depends on what it is.
very rarely
Sometimes.
will I look like deliver today, like available. Otherwise, yeah, rarely.
Well, I'm a little bit of a
It's fair.
crackhead,
It's fair.
so,
I need my pre-workout. I ran out of caffeine and coffee.
Oh my god, I am hurting
Bro,
today. I am hurting
you
today.
mentioned pre-workouts or like companies and just who are we going to align with and everything in general. So I went down this quick rabbit hole
Yeah.
over the weekend of just searching for a few. And like you're sitting there and you're like, yeah, ingredient list and approved by and studies. And I'm like, which one's got the coolest logo? Which one naming convention is good and
Jesus
which
Christ.
flavors sound like they taste the best, right?
Oh
Which we balance
my
each other out,
god.
right? Well,
Honestly,
yeah, I mean,
flavor's
you
a
don't
big
want it
deal.
to taste like garbage, but the marketing on these companies is on point because if I tell you the retargeting from everybody has a get like for a $10 sample pack of like 5 of their pre-workouts, a creatine and a shaker bottle. I don't I was in a daze. I blacked out for like an hour and I think I ordered 4 different sample packs from different companies that are all coming to my house over the next 2 weeks. So,
Steve's gonna be on the next episode
it's
just doing
just
rails of pre-workout. If you guys like this episode, we'll make Steve do a rail of pre-workout for the next one. Yep, yep. You got to do it for the
but
listeners.
so cardio.
But yeah, I mean,
Cardio.
all that cardio. I mean, so you might have a cardiac event if you do too much caffeine, which I think the American Heart Association recommends, like no more than 400 milligrams a day of caffeine. Pussies. Oh man, there was a point where yeah, I was probably doing 1.2 grams. And when you start getting into the grammage for caffeine, Steve was drinking like a couple pots of coffee a
Yeah,
day,
that
like
was
you know.
a different time in my life.
It was.
So,
It was. And actually that is a good segue though, because we find that when people, and there is very much a shit on cardio style of presentation when it comes to fitness these days. And it's really unfortunate because I think that people miss out on a lot of really great benefits from cardiovascular training that frankly you don't get from strength training, although there is a little bit of that crossover. However, when we talk about just, the repair process, like the cell signaling, stuff like that, this is where people start to gravitate towards HIIT, high intensity training, which, sure, that's a type of cardiovascular training. But there are actually different ways that your body responds to training. One of which is that your heart walls get thicker. The other one is that your ventricles, or where the blood goes when it's going through your heart, get bigger and more cavernous. And so when you think about like zone 2 training, which is now starting to gain some momentum in mainstream media, like there's a reason why. And so what we want to figure out and help you guys do as our listeners is that everything has a use case, everything's appropriate at some time. The main question that we want you to ask is like, when should I be doing this and when should I not be doing that? And then knowing when to toggle between the two, and ultimately doing that for the people that you serve if you're a coach, or helping people that if you're just a consumer, and seeing someone do something crazy all the time, probably going to be a good idea. But Steve, what's your perspective on cardio?
it's bad.
Spartan man.
It's bad. It's going to
Bad.
completely lower your metabolic function because you're going to lose all of your muscle and you'll die
Oh.
early because of it. So I wouldn't program it for anybody ever.
Mm,
Totally joking. Totally joking. It's funny.
mm,
I'm
no.
very much in like a strength hypertrophy phase right now, and just trying to reverse and eat all the calories and all the things. It's going really, really well. But I text you yesterday. I'm like, hey, numbers are moving in a great direction. I got to bump my calories again, but man, I'm pushing awfully close to 300 grams of carbs. And for those of you that know me, like Atkins diet was the thing when I was younger, so carbs are clearly bad. Okay, even if it's sweet potatoes or rice. There's a story there, but it's one of those things where I'm like, all right, I got to do this. I'm looking at my data, and my fat my fat on my body from my in body didn't decline as much over the past week as it did the prior week because I keep adding more food. Again, makes sense. Over time, eventually you're going to hit that spot where you're adding some fat to your body as well as muscle. So I'm like, all right, to combat this, I haven't done any focused cardio in the past 3-4 weeks as I've started this block. It's time to layer in a little bit of cardio. My layering in of cardio is literally 15 to 20 minutes twice a week of like a high zone 1 would be ideal, low zone 2 maybe, just pushing a little bit more just to kind of drive some of that cardio response and try to combat some of the fat gain, which at some point is going to happen. Same token though, I'm certainly not going out and trying to run miles and run for an hour and all of these components because it would be against what my current goals are for my body. That said, I've always been somebody who is generally cardiovascularly fit. I can go out and run. I do Spartan races. I do backpacking 13 miles a day with 50 pounds on my back. So cardio is important for my lifestyle no matter what, just because of the things I like to do. And I never want to get away from it for too long because I need to, unless I'm going to start unenjoying the things that I do enjoy. Like having zero cardio capacity and hiking 50 miles in September sounds terrible. And like starting at 5,000 feet above sea level to like 14,000 feet, that's going to be all. I don't care how good of cardio capacity I'm getting. You know what it's like to hike up with 50 pounds on your back at 14,000 feet? I don't know yet because I haven't done it. It's going to suck, but it's going to be the most amazing view. So it's worth it. But, anyways, what was
Wait, where are
that?
you going this year?
This year
Where are
is
you going this
Kings
year?
Canyon down in California. So,
You supporting that state
yeah,
right now, huh?
listen,
With some
listen,
tourism
just you
dollars,
just
huh?
gotta spread it out there. You gotta spread it out. But so I think about cardio from
Okay.
that
Okay.
perspective. I believe it's important for health. I'm going to lean into it a little bit without trying to undo what I'm doing, but it also from a lifestyle perspective, it's important for me to maintain a certain level. Otherwise, I can't do and enjoy the things that I want to do. So that's my quick dissertation from my point of view.
Yeah, I mean, it always depends, and I think that that's a great case. I don't anticipate this episode going long unless I just go on a tirade. But cardio is important, and in fact, it's probably the most fatigue-resistant attribute that you can cultivate using cardiovascular training. Meaning, like generally speaking, we understand that your body is going to use one of three energy systems to keep the lights on, right? To make sure you don't keel over. Everything from blinking, breathing, sweating, laughing, anything that just keeps you alive um, costs energy. And obviously, it's if you think about like a banking system, you don't want to have to go through three savings accounts and transferring four different banking institutions to have access to that money. That really wouldn't be super efficient. And so what happens when you do, things like muscle endurance work, things like, high intensity interval training, low intensity steady state training, high intensity continuous training. There's a lot of different cardiovascular methods, actually. Matter of fact, we do have a resource for this. So if you want it, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and shoot us an email, and we'll make sure that we get that over to you. It literally lists out all. I
Oh
think
yeah,
there's like nine
you
or
wrote
ten
out
different methods.
the what was it, the guide or ebook that you did? Yeah.
Mhm. Yep. Yep. Yeah, there's a whole cardio training ebook where we go over like what heart rates, generally speaking, are appropriate for what. But and it's interesting that you mentioned like high zone one, because we don't even see any aerobic benefit until you're at least in like a little bit of zone two. And so when we talk about benefits now, when we talk about being fatigue resistant, you want to have a lot of blood vessel development. You want to have good mitochondria, which is where your cells are now able to take that ATP or that energy currency, and it's able to basically make it useful for you if you want to think about it in a very lay sense. So you need more mitochondria, basically the energy production area of the cell. And you need to be able to cycle through these things, more blood vessels to circulate oxygen to working tissue, right? And yes, you do get some of those aspects from strength training. But this is where now, depending on what kind of training you're doing, you're going to elicit a different degree of that adaptation. And I said this earlier, but we understand that when you do zone 2 training, you actually get a very pronounced ventricular hypertrophy, or basically your heart has 4 ventricles that circulate the blood through it. That's where the blood goes. And so when you do easier cardio above a certain threshold, like you can't just go out there and walk necessarily at like a leisurely pace. It's not going to create any demand for your body to change. It's not going to be like, hey, body, make energy now. And your body's going to be like, because it's just too low of an intensity. And so you have to exercise above that threshold in order for you to be able to turn around and say, hey, body, I need you to make bigger heart ventricles so we can squeeze more blood per pump. Something called the ejection fraction goes up, right? But then we find that if you do higher intensity stuff or if you do resistance training, you actually increase your myocardium thickness, or the heart walls actually get thicker, so they get more forceful when they squeeze. And so when you think about it, like the people that are just doing strength training or just high intensity interval training, their resting heart rate actually may go up sometimes, simply for the fact that now their heart has to beat more frequently to circulate the same amount of blood. Obviously, this is for people that are leisurely training. But that's one of the reasons why when you're coaching people, you want to make sure that you're keeping track of resting heart rate variability, things like that, because it's an indication of how their body might actually be changing. So, Steve, translate.
Cardio, bad. Lifting weights, good. Unless you're lifting weights hard, good. But cardio, also good because it strengthens your heart to pump more volume. So
I think the last sentence makes sense, but I'm only halfway here
I'm
today,
messing with
guys.
you at the
I
beginning. I
can't.
mean,
He fucking boomeranged me.
so
I don't
confused.
know. I don't
No,
know.
I mean, it's, you know,
It was early morning.
your heart's a muscle like everything else, and we have to exercise
Yeah.
all of our muscles. Like,
Blood
it's just
vessels.
factually speaking. For me, adding in that cardio now, it's funny. High zone 1, like as I start to get into zone 2, if I start to hit zone 2, I lose control and fly to zone 3 these days. Like, it's just I'm I'm walking more weight, like just all the things and whatnot. So I found that if I can go in zone 1 after 20 minutes, I'm hanging in low zone 2. Otherwise, I'm just like, all right, I'm zone 3 and I'm dying.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's trying to understand that about my body and see like, oh, but it's funny, as you mentioned, my watch. So a Samsung watch gives you an energy score every morning based upon a couple of factors: your resting heart rate and your HRV. But your resting heart rate's the one I'm talking about here, does contribute to that. And over the past 4 weeks, my resting heart rate has gradually increased overnight, and it's not a lot. It's gone from 57 to like 61 or 62 now. So 1 or 2 points a week. So at the end of 6 to 8 weeks ish, I could see that it does pop up by like 10 to 15. Now, I think partially it's because my body's just trying to recover and I'm pushing myself hard, but also very much partially I'm doing way less cardio than I had been doing. So, but I did 225 on the bench for 11 reps this morning. So, getting stronger.
You keep doing that, you're gonna be able to knock out Muhammad Ali soon. You know how it goes. People beating up boxers these days, so you're gonna put you in a fight and gonna be on pump everywhere. But no, I mean, and you bring up a great point, and this is where I think that for listeners, it's this is the value of a coach, is that as your body changes, so too must how you manipulate the variables. And you mentioned like you shoot straight through zone 2. Chances are good that your zone 2 actually isn't zone 2 anymore then. And that's where we do things like a metabolic assessment or a VO2 max test. And you kind of basically, and just so you guys are all clear, there's a couple of different ways to measure some of these zones. There's the mathematical way, which is it'll get you on the board, but I probably really wouldn't use it unless I had no other alternative. It's a mathematical calculation from you take 220, and there's a couple different ways. This is just the most simple. So you also have the Carbonin formula if you want to go look at that, but 220 minus your age, right? So I'm 35, so 220 beats per minute minus 35 would theoretically be 185 beats per minute, would be my estimated maximal heart rate. Meaning if I ran my guts out that might be the fastest my heart might beat, right? 185 times per minute. So, Steve, what's your max heart rate?
According to the formula,
According to the formula,
181 I'd be.
181, right? So now that's the worst slash easiest way to calculate that. We'll talk about zones here in a second, but the next best way is to go and do a maximal stress test. And you just go like run a mile as fast as you can, like you used to do in middle school PE when they made fun of you and pulled your pants down in the locker room. It's fine. I'm not traumatized, but go do something really hard for like 5 to 10 minutes and see how high your heart rate can get. If you don't have a wearable like a chest strap or a watch, you can literally just take your 2 fingers, put it on the side of your neck where you can feel the little heartbeat. And then you can count, for 15 seconds, how many times that happens and multiply it by 4. You just count for a whole minute. I like to do the shorter times because as you wait for the rest of the minute, it actually might slow down. So be a
Count
little
for
bit
1
confounding with
second
that.
and
Now,
then multiply by 60.
maybe 5. I feel like 1. Interestingly enough, when you breathe in, your heart rate spikes, and when you exhale, your heart rate goes down. And so if you just happen to be breathing in for that 1 second, it's going to be like, my God. Actually, that's probably a good thing though, because we are trying to find how high it gets. So a good call out. Yeah. But yeah, so then that's another way of just literally doing an exertion task, counting it out loud or, in your head or whatever, and figuring out that way. And then obviously you have another different type of activity where you literally go and go to a facility and get tested, which is probably the safest / most effective way. And all of it depends upon the resources that you have, or, if you don't have access to a metabolic cart or a leaf unit or whatever it is, then, do the exertion test. If you don't have access to an exertion test for a client that's somewhere else because you do remote coaching, just do the calculations and then over time figure it out. But I think a lot of people really get wrapped around the axle of like, it has to be perfect out of the gate. Like, no, it really doesn't. But you mentioned something earlier too around like, the heart rate kind of blowing through it. And that's why it's so important, because if you go above, and you've heard us kind of use the term zones, if you go above a zone 3, you get into what's something called your anaerobic threshold, is where you pass that. And that's where your muscles really start to burn and you start to fatigue and you can't keep up that pace anymore. It happens in strength training, and interestingly enough, when you squeeze a muscle more than 40%, you actually stop blood flow. You occlude that to the working tissue as much. And so this is why you develop those ischemic conditions, or basically like that hypoxia, that like burning sensation. So if you ever wondered, that's a very loose explanation of why that happens and why you can't continue to contract that muscle. But at the end of the day, heart rate zones, then like you have your max. That's cool. What do we do with that? Well, don't go higher than that or you'll die. You probably won't die actually, but it'd be very uncomfortable. And if you're going as hard as you can all the time, I'm sure that if you've ever run 100 meters as fast as you can, you're not going to keep that pace for the rest of a mile run, right? If you run a 5K pace, you're not going to keep that pace for a 26-mile run. It's just not how that works. So what we're doing is effectively introducing something called gears or throttles or zones, right? Like the same way that when you're driving your car and you go above 15 to 20 miles an hour, your car then shifts into a different gear, right? And then you go to 34, 35, 40 miles an hour, shifts into a different gear, right? So your body does the same thing when it's like, oh shit, I need to produce energy in this way. Fat's the easiest fuel source for it to kind of have access to and like use at low intensity. So for the most part, when you're sitting here, you're using fat as a primary fuel source. As it gets more intense, this is where you use more carbohydrate, which is why when we train athletic populations, one of the first macronutrients that we actually prioritize, depending on what sport they're playing, may not actually be protein. It might actually be carbohydrate if they're a very endurance-oriented athlete. And this is where we might find, like, it's funny because you're like, oh, man, 300 grams of carbs is a lot. I'm on 450 grams of carbs right now, and I love it.
Well,
Like,
I'm enjoying
dude,
like
if I didn't,
I
I will
last
fucking
night
die.
I'm like, man, I actually got like 300 calories left and everything. Sophia looks at me, she's like, that sounds like a perfect amount of calories for ice cream. And I'm like, Actually, I can fit
Actually,
that in no problem. I ended my day at 101% of my calories.
how much ice cream is that's
It
like a
was a
handful.
small frosty from Wendy's.
So two
So
handfuls. Okay. All right.
yeah,
Interesting.
not two full
And there you
handfuls. It
go.
wasn't. It was like that big. So
That's like 12 inches, dude. Um, now, for those of you that don't know, we are not sponsored by Wendy's, but if anyone knows anyone from Wendy's, we will happily take a
absolutely.
sponsorship and pay a percentage.
Oh,
It's fine. If you dip your fry, do you dip fries into
I haven't
your
had a fast
frosty?
food French fry in a long time.
I'd say
Do they?
Chick-fil-A has the best
Oh, they,
fries.
they have the
So,
waffle fries, right?
hey, comment who you think has the
Waffle
best
fries.
fries below.
Yeah.
They have the waffle fries. They do have, Burger King also has the
Actually, you know
crispiest
what?
fries.
As you say that,
Um,
Chick-fil-A 2 or 3 years ago, pre my backpacking trip, was one of my meals that I had, and I had their fries.
Oh God, I'm craving some right now. So, hey, they're Kathy's or the Truett's, whoever, I forget the last name of it. Guys, I'm operating on 50% today. They will take a cut of that too, right? In fact, if anyone knows anyone in Chick-fil-A, we'd rather take that sponsorship, but I think we're two heathens right now. So I don't think they'll take us. But long story short, like at the end of the day, coming back and bringing it back in is, you need to be able to apply the right tool at the right time. And if you don't work out hard enough, and let me back up for a second. We're always trying to find what we call the Goldilocks zone. How much do we need to do to see a benefit? And what's the smallest amount that we have to do to get that? And again, I use the analogy like you wouldn't pay $200 for your phone bill if it only was supposed to cost you $100 a month. It'd be dumb, right? You're literally misallocating funds or resources. It's the same thing with your activities. It's the same thing with your exercises. It's the same thing with your nutrition. It's the same thing with your fitness. It's the same thing with your relationships. It's really just everywhere. So don't put more effort into it until if you're getting the result that you want, so to speak. And I think we really that's different soapbox. I'm not going to talk about that. But people work too hard these days, or they don't work hard at all. And so we're trying to strike the balance. But zones, gears, zone one is effectively, and if you want to do the mathematical calculations, which are wildly, crazy, 50 to 60% of your maximal heart rate, so that 220 minus your age or that stress test, those will actually then be potentially what your zone would kind of fall inside of the band of. Then we have zone two, which is going to be obviously 60 to 70%, zone three, 70 to 80, zone four, 80 to 90, zone five, 90 to 100. Sometimes you hear people use four zones, more or less the same thing. The two things that really matter in that kind of five zone throttle, if you will, is your aerobic base and your anaerobic threshold. Your aerobic base is how much intensity you have to have at a very minimal effect to actually create a cardiovascular demand on your body. And that's in between zone one and zone two. That's the little kind of border right there. Between zone three and zone four is your anaerobic threshold. And that's where you start to really accumulate a lot of fatigue and your body really can't sustain that amount of activity. So for most people, the majority of your exercise from a health perspective should probably be under zone four, honestly. And we find that from an injury prevention perspective, from an enjoyment perspective. I don't know many people that really like to go out there and suffer. And if that's you, like you're my people, right? CrossFitters are a little bit crazy. People that are doing triathlons and just go out there and just beat themselves. And those people aren't the norm, right? So let me just call that out. But so the majority of people should do things that are comfortable. And realistically, winning the fitness game is stacking as much easy volume as you can get. Like your body's going to change if you actually enjoy the process. If you want to go and do dance jam or go do some fucking dance class, or the Pilates don't count for strength training, by the way. Don't at me. Go ahead, drop the hate in the comments. I'm just stirring the pot. We're seeing what kind of comments we're going to get out of this one. I'm just kidding. We all know that the Pilates is just the 100s and you just flap your arms. I'm kidding. I have a great deep respect for Joseph Pilates. He actually did a lot of great stuff. But right tool, right time. And so if you spend all of your time in zone one, which zone one is great for active recovery, but it's not going to help get you the cardiovascular changes. It's not going to help you burn fat. It's not going to help you do any of those things that you might expect from exercise. But if you feel like you're going to puke all the time, probably also going to be a little bit deleterious. And in fact, there was some research that was published, and I don't know if this has changed. So disclaimer, But like I was in grad school at the time, so probably like 9 years ago, 10 years ago now. And there was some research that was starting to emerge that the harder you work out, if you work out excessively hard, think about like CrossFit Games athletes who are working out 3 to 4 times a day, 5 to 6 days a week, like that would be excessive. But it actually did trigger some genetic mutations in something called your oncogenes, which are cancer related genes. And so, the oxidative effects of excessive exercise in the presence of inadequate nutrition is very potentially harmful for health. So that's also something to consider that, obviously less is more and is the nature of what we're saying right now for the average general population. If you're an athlete, suck it up, buttercup. You got to get paid, you got to perform. But everyone else, just chill out a little bit. Do the zones thing. If you, again, comment below and we'll go ahead and shoot that resource over to you, because we do have a cardio training methods thing that works
Yeah,
really
and
well.
the
So
thing that I would
see if you're
throw
not
out
like,
there is there's so many people today saying how bad cardio is and you should do strength training. The reality is, as coaches, we know cardio is useful for certain applications and certain reasons and certain goals. So if you want to stand out to a crowd of people that are still mentally or wrapped around the idea that they need to do cardio to lose weight, guess what you should probably talk about? How you incorporate cardio into your workouts and into your routines and into your program in such a way that it
mm-hmm,
maximizes fat loss and preserves muscle gain, thereby really boosting your metabolism. Like, think about
mm-hmm,
that messaging
mm-hmm,
to the core group of people, especially people who, again, still believe eat less calories, eat less, and do more cardio. We need to,
mm-hmm,
you
mm-hmm,
can't go at them and go down this road of cardio is bad because guess what? They're
mm-hmm,
not going to hear you. But appropriate
mm-hmm,
cardio is appropriate. And chances are it's just changing a little bit of a mindset and probably getting them to go
mm-hmm,
slightly less intense or lightly less time and spend some more time lifting, and that's going to be the thing. So I bet you
mm-hmm.
that's a good way to
Yeah.
communicate with your ideal clients, potentially, if depending upon who your clients are.
Yeah. Yeah. If they're athletes, they don't care about
Correct. How,
anything.
how
Just
do
tell
I
them where to
win?
go. Oddly enough. How do I win? How do I win? How do I? And if you haven't listened to the last episode where we talked about shit water, you're missing out. So there's a lot of gold nuggets that we've covered in the last recents. But again, at the end of the day, cardio is important. We've beaten that horse. The way that we suggest going about the cardio stuff is probably intelligently with prescribing the right intention. The same way that if you're a strength training coach or if you're a personal trainer, you're going to give people like, hey, 85% times 3 reps of a back squat times whatever number of sets, like times 5 sets, rest 3 minutes. These are the variables that go into making a meaningful cardiovascular training program that no one really seems to be doing with any scale. And it is the thing that if you do good cardio, you actually are going to recover better for intense training sessions. So you should alternate between a cardio focused block and a strength training block on occasion. So that's really the long game.
All right.
But anything to close us out, Steve, as we
No, I
wrap
think
up
really the
here?
main goal here is appropriately use cardio in your programming. Talk about it the right way.
Mm-hmm,
Obviously,
mm-hmm,
strength training very much has its place. Both of those things have pros and cons. Understand those things, leverage it, talk about it, and you just end up building better business, end up being a better coach, creating better results. And that's ultimately what
mm-hmm,
we're all here
mm-hmm.
for. So,
And just to put this in frame of reference, because like obviously we get sound bites here and there. Um, when we talk about longevity and good coaching is good business, which is what you just said, and it kind of prompted me. Um, thinking about this, like you can have whatever you want, you can't have it all at the same time. And so before you start trying to get someone super strong by lifting really heavy weights for a few repetitions, you're probably going to want to make sure that you're helping their connective tissues develop, right, to handle that strain of those heavy loads on those joints. Before that, you probably also want to, and those would be separate things, right? Strength training, connective tissue focus. And then you might even have something like an aerobic base type of block that might be anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks long, where you literally just give them a lot of activity in general. So that way they get used to doing a lot of activity before you start trying to crush their system with a whole bunch of heavy load. And so when we talk about building comprehensive plans, we want to see that stacks over time versus like randomly doing a hypertrophy block and then a strength block, and then a hit block. Like you want to have a bigger picture, and this cardio stuff is going to really support someone's longevity inside of having, really a lifelong status of feeling good, being healthy, and having good body composition. So, yeah, thanks for being here today. We'll
Thanks
see you
for
guys in the
listening to
next one.
Beyond the Pump Crew, where we break down the business of fitness and nutrition. Subscribe to the page, like the video, throw some comments if you want to hear some content. But otherwise, until next time.
Pump it up.